Hey guys, tonight we begin with something heavy. A story that shaped this nation in ways we're still reckoning with. We're stepping into the world of American chattel slavery, not from the safe distance of textbooks and documentaries, but from the inside. What would it actually feel like to wake up as an enslaved person on a cotton plantation in the antebellum South? The answer is worse than you've imagined, and different in ways you might not expect. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Mississippi, somewhere around 1852. The good news is the sun isn't up yet. The bad news is that's exactly why you're awake. A horn blasts through the darkness, a sound so sharp and unwelcome it cuts through whatever dream you were clinging to. There's no snooze button. There's no pretending you didn't hear it. That horn is the first commandment of your existence, and ignoring it carries consequences you've learned never to test. Your eyes open to absolute darkness. The cabin has no windows, or if it does, they're just gaps in the wood stuffed with rags to keep out the worst of the cold. The air is thick with the smell of bodies, smoke from last night's dying fire, and the earthen floor beneath you. You're lying on a pallet of corn husks and old fabric, maybe a thin blanket if you're fortunate, spread across wooden boards that dig into your spine no matter how you arrange yourself. Around you, others stir. This cabin holds anywhere from 6 to 12 people, depending on the size of your enslaver's operation and how much he values keeping families together, which is to say, not much. You might be sleeping beside your mother, your children, or strangers who arrived last month from a sale in New Orleans. The quarters are cramped not by accident, but by design. Space costs money. Your comfort costs nothing to the man who owns you. You sit up and immediately feel the cold. Even in the deep South, mornings before dawn carry a chill that seeps through the gaps in the walls and rises up from the packed dirt floor. Your clothes, if you can call them that, are a coarse Osnaburg shirt and trousers, a fabric so rough it might as well be woven from sandpaper and resentment. You've worn these same garments for months. The plantation issues clothing twice a year if you're lucky. Once if the harvest was poor, or the enslaver is feeling stingy, which is most of the time. The fabric chafes against your skin in places that never fully heal, and the seams are so crude they leave welts along your shoulders and under your arms. Your shoes, should you have any, are brogans, clunky, leather things with wooden soles that blister your feet until calluses form so thick you barely feel the ground anymore. Many in your cabin go barefoot year-round, their soles hardened into something almost inhuman, a small adaptation the body makes when the system offers nothing else. You stand, and every joint protests. You're 24 years old, but your body belongs to a much older person. Someone who has spent years bent over cotton rows, hauling water, chopping wood, and absorbing punishments that leave marks on the inside as much as the outside. The ache in your lower back is constant now, a companion you've stopped noticing except on mornings like this when the cold makes everything sharper. Outside, the horn sounds again. The overseer is impatient. You have roughly 15 minutes to relieve yourself, splash water on your face if there's any to spare, and assemble in the yard for roll call. There's no bathroom, of course. There's a communal privy somewhere behind the cabins, a rough wooden structure over a pit that smells exactly like you'd expect. In the dark, you navigate by memory and by the sound of others doing the same. Privacy is a concept that belongs to white people. Here, in the quarters, you learn to perform the most basic human functions surrounded by others, and you learn not to think about it too hard. The water barrel near your cabin is nearly frozen on top. You break the thin ice with your knuckles and cup your hands to drink, then splash your face. The cold is shocking, almost painful, but it wakes you fully. That's the point. You need to be alert. Mistakes in the field aren't just embarrassing, they're dangerous. A moment's distraction, a row picked too slowly, a word spoken out of turn, any of these can bring the overseer's attention, and his attention always arrives attached to a whip. Roll call happens in the yard between the cabins and the main house, a space of packed earth where the enslaved gather each morning to be counted like inventory, which is exactly what you are. The overseer, a white man whose name you know but never speak aloud, walks down the line with a lantern, checking faces against his mental list. He's looking for anyone missing, anyone sick, anyone who might have run. The punishment for running is severe, not just for the person who fled, but sometimes for those left behind. Collective punishment keeps everyone invested in everyone else's obedience. It's efficient, in the way a machine is efficient. You stand straight, eyes forward, hands at your sides. You've learned how to hold your body to avoid drawing attention. Too slumped and you look lazy. Too proud and you look defiant. There's a posture somewhere in between that signals compliance without complete submission, and you've spent years finding it. The overseer passes you without comment, which is the best outcome. Being noticed is never good. After roll call, the field hands receive their assignments. Cotton is king here, and you are its subject. The fields stretch out beyond the tree line, hundreds of acres of white bolls waiting to be harvested. During picking season, which runs from late August through December, you'll spend every hour of daylight and some hours beyond bent double over the plants, fingers working through the bolls to extract the fiber without damaging it. The work is relentless. Each enslaved person has a daily quota, often measured in pounds of cotton picked. The quota varies by plantation and by the cruelty of the enslaver, but a common expectation is somewhere between 100 and 200 pounds per day. If you fail to meet your quota, you're whipped. One lash for every pound you fall short, in some cases. The mathematics of suffering, calculated down to the ounce. But here's the thing they don't tell you in the history books. Meeting your quota doesn't keep you safe. It raises it. If you pick 150 pounds today, the enslaver notes your capability. Tomorrow, your quota becomes 150. Next week, 175. The system is designed so you can never truly satisfy it. Your competence becomes your curse. The strongest, fastest workers are punished with escalating expectations until their bodies break down, at which point they're sold off or worked until they die. Excellence is not rewarded here. It's exploited. You file out toward the fields with the others, hoes and sacks distributed by a driver, an enslaved man given limited authority to manage the work gang in exchange for marginally better treatment. The driver occupies a complicated position. He's one of you, yet he enforces the rules that oppress you. Some drivers use their position to protect their people, slowing the pace when the overseer isn't watching, warning of dangers, shielding the weak. Others internalize the logic of the system and become as brutal as any white overseer. You've seen both kinds. You've learned to read them quickly because your survival depends on understanding who holds power and how they wield it. The walk to the fields takes 15 minutes. The sky is just beginning to lighten. A thin grey line along the eastern horizon. The air smells of dew, earth, and the faint sweetness of cotton plants. Under other circumstances, this might almost be beautiful, but you don't have the luxury of appreciating beauty. Your mind is already calculating. How much did you pick yesterday? How much will you need to pick today? Is the overseer in a foul mood? Did anyone get whipped last night? Every piece of information matters. Every detail could mean the difference between getting through the day intact or carrying fresh wounds back to your cabin. The cotton field swallows you whole. Row after row of plants stand chest high, their boles split open to reveal the white fiber inside. From a distance, it looks almost peaceful, like snow scattered across a green sea. Up close, it's a battlefield. The cotton boll isn't soft when you're harvesting it. The dried husk around the fiber is sharp, with points that jab into your fingertips with every grab. By mid-morning, your hands are bleeding. By afternoon, the blood has dried and mixed with dirt and plant residue into a gritty paste that cracks when you flex your fingers. After a few weeks of picking, your fingertips are so calloused and scarred that you lose sensitivity entirely. Old hands in the quarters sometimes can't feel anything at all in their fingers. A numbness that spreads up through the palms. Your body adapts, but the adaptation itself is a kind of damage. You pick with both hands, working 2 rows at once, stuffing the cotton into a long sack that drags behind you and grows heavier with each passing hour. The sack can weigh 40, 50, 60 pounds by the end of the day, a burden you haul across uneven ground, while still bending, reaching, picking. The sun climbs higher. There's no shade in the cotton field. The hat on your head, if you have one, does little to block the Mississippi sun, which beats down with an intensity that seems personal. Sweat soaks through your clothes within the first hour and never dries. You drink water when the water carrier comes by, if they come by, which isn't guaranteed. Dehydration is common. Heat exhaustion is common. Collapse is common. When someone falls, the others keep working. You've learned that stopping to help only brings the overseer's attention to both of you. Noon arrives without ceremony. There's no lunch break in the formal sense. Just a brief pause during the hottest hours when even the overseers recognize that working people to death in direct sunlight is counterproductive. You sit in whatever shade you can find, usually the shadow of your own body hunched over your knees, and eat what you brought. This is typically a piece of cornbread, maybe some cold bacon if you're fortunate, and water. The ration system on most plantations provides a set amount of food per week, usually a peck of cornmeal and a few pounds of salted pork. It's not enough. It's never enough. You supplement when you can by growing vegetables in the small garden plots some enslavers allow, by fishing or trapping when time permits, by quietly taking what you need and hoping no one notices. The cooking falls mostly to the women, who somehow find time between field labor and exhaustion to transform meager rations into something approaching a meal. They know which wild greens are safe to eat, how to stretch a piece of fatback into flavoring for a whole pot, how to make corn taste different enough day after day that you don't lose your mind from the monotony. This knowledge passes between generations like scripture, practical wisdom that keeps bodies alive when the system provides barely enough to survive. The diet is monotonous and nutritionally poor. Diseases related to vitamin deficiencies are rampant. Your teeth ache from lack of proper nutrients. Your gums bleed. You've seen children with bellies swollen from malnutrition while surrounded by fields producing wealth beyond imagining. The irony isn't lost on you. You grow cotton that becomes cloth, that becomes fine dresses for women who've never felt hunger. You pick the profits that build mansions you're not allowed to enter through the front door. Every bowl you harvest makes someone else rich, while you eat cornmeal and salt pork and try not to think too hard about the arrangement. The afternoon is the hardest part. The heat peaks around 2 or 3 o'clock, and your body, already exhausted from hours of labor, begins to rebel. Your vision swims. Your hands move slower despite your best efforts. The overseer notices everything. He rides on horseback between the rows, watching for anyone slacking, anyone falling behind. The whip coiled at his saddle isn't just decoration. You felt it. Most everyone here has felt it. The first time is shocking. Not just the pain, but the sound. A crack like a branch breaking, followed by a line of fire across your back. After that, the threat of it becomes its own kind of presence, a constant weight pressing down on every decision you make. Should you stand up to stretch your back? He might see. Should you pause to pick a thorn from your palm? He might see. Should you help the elderly woman in the next row who's clearly struggling? He might see. And then you're both in trouble. The whip isn't the only punishment, of course. There are also the stocks, the paddling, the withheld food, the sail away from family. Each enslaver has preferences. Some are sadistically creative. Others outsource the cruelty to their overseers and maintain a fiction of gentility in the main house. The effect is the same. You live in a state of constant vigilance, your nervous system permanently tuned to threat, your body carrying tension in places you can't even name. As the sun finally begins to descend, you feel something almost like hope. Almost. Because the day isn't over when the sun sets. It's over when the horn sounds again. And that could be minutes or hours away, depending on the overseer's mood and the day's progress. When the horn finally comes, you straighten your back for the first time in hours, and the pain is exquisite. Your spine feels like it's been compressed into half its length. Your legs tremble. Your hands won't uncurl from the picking position. You gather your sack and join the line heading back toward the yard, where the day's work will be measured. This is the moment of judgment. One by one, each person's sack is weighed on a scale, and the number is recorded. The overseer stands by with a ledger and a whip. You watch the faces of those ahead of you, reading their outcomes in the set of their shoulders, the speed of their walk away from the scale. When it's your turn, you heave your sack onto the platform and wait. The number comes back. You've made your quota, barely. Relief floods through you, mixed with exhaustion so profound it feels like drowning. You collect your empty sack and walk back toward the quarters, your body moving on memory alone. The quarters are no refuge, but they're yours. This small collection of cabins, 12 by 12 feet at most, houses the only community you have. Here, in the hours between work and sleep, something resembling life happens. People cook over open fires, sharing what little they have. Conversations happen in low voices, always cautious, always aware that walls are thin and loyalties can be bought. But there's laughter here too, and singing, and stories passed down through generations. The culture that enslaved people built, even under these conditions, was and is remarkable. Spirituals that encoded messages of resistance, folktales that mocked the powerful and celebrated the clever, kinship networks that stretched across plantations, maintained through secret meetings and whispered news. You weren't supposed to have a culture. You weren't supposed to be fully human. And yet here, it is, flourishing in the cracks, stubbornly alive. Your cabin smells of wood smoke, corn, and the particular scent of people who work hard and have limited means to wash. There's a fire going in the rudimentary hearth, more smoke than flame, but it provides light and some warmth as the evening cools. You eat your portion of the communal meal, cornmeal mush with whatever vegetables could be scrounged, and you sit with people who have become your family, whether or not you share blood. You talk about the day. You share information. Who's sick? Who's being watched? What the mood is in the main house. Every scrap of knowledge is currency here. Sunday is different. On most plantations, Sunday is the one day when field labor pauses. Not out of kindness, but because even the most brutal enslaver recognizes that bodies need some rest to remain productive. The morning might still begin with religious services, often conducted by a white preacher who delivers sermons about obedience, about servants obeying their masters, about rewards waiting in the afterlife for those who suffer patiently now. You sit through these services with a face carefully blank, hearing the words but rejecting them in your heart. This isn't your faith. This is their faith dressed up to serve their purposes. Your faith happens later, in the quarters, when your own preachers speak of Moses and Pharaoh, of deliverance and justice, of a God who sees every lash and remembers every name. Sunday afternoon belongs to you, at least in theory. Some people tend their garden plots, growing the vegetables that supplement the starvation rations. Others visit family on neighboring plantations if they've managed to get a pass, those precious slips of paper that grant temporary permission to exist outside the bounds of the property. Some simply rest, lying in the shade or fishing in the creek, storing up whatever peace they can find against the week ahead. The children gather around the oldest woman in the quarters, a grandmother figure who survived longer than anyone thought possible. She tells stories, some from Africa passed down through oral tradition, some invented, some true accounts of resistance and escape dressed up as fables. The children listen with wide eyes, and you listen too, because these stories carry something essential. They remind you that you're part of something larger than this plantation, this state, this moment. Your people have a history that stretches back before the ships, before the chains, before any white man set foot on any of this land. The stories don't make the present easier, but they make it meaningful. They locate your suffering in a context that includes survival, resistance, and ultimately, the possibility of freedom. Freedom. You think about it more often than you'd admit. Everyone does. The underground network of information that runs through the enslaved community carries whispers about runaways who made it north, about conductors who help people disappear, about free states where a person can live without a master. Canada glimmers in the imagination like a fairy tale, too good to believe and too powerful to forget. But running is dangerous. The odds are terrible. Slave catchers, dogs, exposure, starvation. If you're caught, the punishment is biblical. Whipping, branding, sail to the deep south where conditions are even worse, if such a thing is imaginable. Some people try anyway. Some people decide that even death is preferable to this half-life. You've seen people leave in the night and never return, and you don't know if they made it, or if their bodies are rotting somewhere in a swamp. But you hold on to the hope that at least some of them found the other side. The threat of sail hangs over everything like weather you can't predict. Families here aren't protected by law. Your marriage isn't recognized. Your children aren't legally yours. At any moment, for any reason or no reason at all, the enslaver can decide to sell you, your spouse, your children, your parents. Maybe he needs money. Maybe he's punishing someone. Maybe he simply wants to. The auction block waits in every nearby town, a platform where human beings stand while strangers inspect their teeth and muscles and make bids. You've seen families torn apart, mothers screaming as children are dragged away, husbands watching helplessly as wives are loaded onto wagons heading south. The grief doesn't heal. It just becomes another scar carried invisibly. People learn to love cautiously here, knowing that every attachment is a vulnerability. And yet they love anyway, fiercely and fully, because the alternative is to become the hollow thing the system wants them to be. Love is its own resistance. Sleep comes hard and never lasts long. You lie down on your pallet as the fire dies, pulling your thin blanket over your body and trying to quiet your mind. But your body won't stop aching. Your hands throb. Your back seizes every time you shift position. And your mind keeps running through tomorrow, the next day. The endless procession of days that look exactly like this one. What keeps you going is hard to name. Partly it's sheer biological imperative, the animal drive to survive another day. Partly it's the connections you've built, the people who depend on you and whom you depend on. Partly it's spite, the determination not to give them the satisfaction of breaking you completely. And partly, buried deep, it's hope, not optimism, not expectation, just the stubborn refusal to believe that this is all there is. The spirituals talk about deliverance, about Jordan, about home. Some of that is about the afterlife, but some of it isn't. Some of it is code for freedom, for the North, for a future where your children's children will sleep in beds they own and wake to mornings that belong to them. You close your eyes and let the sounds of the cabin wash over you, the breathing of others, the creak of wood, the distant bark of dogs guarding the main house. Tomorrow, the horn will sound again. Tomorrow you'll rise before dawn and walk to the fields and bend over the cotton until your back screams. Tomorrow will look exactly like today, and the day after that, and the day after that. But tonight, in the dark, you allow yourself to imagine something different. You imagine walking north under stars that belong to no one, following the drinking gourd like the songs say. You imagine crossing a river into a place where your name is your own. The image is fragile, easily crushed by reality, but you hold it anyway. It's the most precious thing you possess. Morning comes faster than mercy. The horn tears through the darkness again, and you force your body vertical despite its protests. The routine begins anew, the same as yesterday, the same as it will be tomorrow, and every tomorrow until something changes. You splash water on your face, eat whatever's left from last night, assemble in the yard, and march toward the fields with the others. The cotton is still there, endless rows of it, white bowls gleaming in the early light. Your hands remember what to do even when your mind rebels. Pick, stuff, drag, repeat. Pick, stuff, drag, repeat. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic, a way to survive the hours by not fully inhabiting them. You float somewhere above your body, present enough to avoid mistakes, but detached enough to endure. The sun climbs, the heat builds, the overseer makes his rounds, and you keep picking, because the alternative is worse, because stopping isn't an option, because your body has been conscripted into a machine that runs on stolen labor and pain. Sometimes, in moments like this, you wonder how the world can contain this much cruelty and still function. You wonder how the men in the main house sleep at night, how they sit in church on Sundays and hear sermons about sin and salvation without their souls catching fire. You wonder if they know what they are, or if they've convinced themselves of some story that makes it all acceptable. Masters often claim their enslaved people are happy, that slavery is a benevolent institution, that they're providing civilization to savages. You've heard these justifications whispered and shouted, preached and published. They would be laughable if they weren't so deadly. The men who whip you also claim to be Christians. The women who profit from your labor also consider themselves ladies of refinement. The entire structure rests on a foundation of lies so massive it shapes the landscape itself, the law, the economy, the culture. You exist inside that lie, but you've never believed it. None of you have. The religion that enslaved people developed was something separate, something true. Yes, the masters forced Christianity on you, but you took it and transformed it into something they couldn't control. The God you pray to isn't the same God they invoke when they bless their meals and count their money. Your God sees. Your God remembers. Your God promises that the last shall be first, that the oppressors will face judgment, that freedom is coming even if you don't live to see it. The spirituals carry this theology in every note, songs of sorrow that are also songs of defiance. Go down, Moses, and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. The masters think these songs are quaint, harmless expressions of primitive faith. They don't understand that every line is a declaration of resistance, every melody an assertion of humanity they're trying to deny. When you sing in the fields, quietly so the overseer doesn't notice, you're participating in an act of rebellion. Your voice is your own. Your faith is your own. Your inner life remains uncaptured no matter what they do to your body. This is the victory they can never touch, the part of you that stays free even in chains. The seasons turn, and the work shifts with them. Cotton picking gives way to processing as the harvest ends. Then comes clearing, ploughing, planting. The rhythm of agricultural labor follows the earth's cycles, and your body is tied to those cycles like a tool. Winter brings some relief from the heat, but replaces it with cold that the thin walls of your cabin can't keep out. Spring means longer days and back-breaking work preparing the fields. Summer is the endless chopping of weeds, keeping the cotton plants clear of competition. And then fall comes again, and the picking resumes, and the whole brutal carousel continues its rotation. Each season carries its own dangers, its own exhaustions, its own small opportunities for rest or resistance. You learn to navigate the calendar like a sailor reading the weather, anticipating what's coming and preparing as best you can. The years pass. Children are born into this system, arriving into bondage as naturally as drawing breath. Their futures already written in ledgers and wills. You watch them grow and wonder what world they'll inherit. Some will be sold away, dispersed to others, plantations like seeds scattered by wind. Some will stay and learn the same brutal rhythms you know. A few might find freedom through escape, through purchase, through the chaos of events not yet imaginable. You teach them what you can. How to survive without surrendering. How to hold on to themselves when everything conspires to strip them away. How to love in a system designed to make love a liability. And you pray that they'll see days you won't, that the world is moving towards something better, even if the movement is too slow to perceive. Resistance takes many forms, most of them invisible to the masters who think they know everything. There's the resistance of slowing down, of working just under the threshold of punishment, of conserving energy and strength for yourself instead of pouring it all into their profits. There's the resistance of feigning ignorance, playing the fool so they underestimate you, so they reveal information they shouldn't, so they give you space to maneuver. There's the resistance of sabotage, small acts of destruction that look like accidents, broken tools, sick animals, fires that start mysteriously. And there's the resistance of maintaining your humanity, your culture, your family bonds, your faith. Every song is resistance. Every story is resistance. Every moment of joy stolen from their system of misery is resistance. The masters call you lazy, stupid, childlike. They construct an entire ideology to explain why you deserve this treatment, why it's natural, why it's even good for you. But their explanations reveal their own anxiety. If enslaved people truly were the contented, inferior beings they're described as, why would so much violence be necessary to keep the system functioning? Why the whips, the chains, the patrols, the laws against literacy, the brutal punishments for the smallest infractions? The ferocity of the oppression is itself evidence that the masters know the truth. You are human. You are capable. You are dangerous. And they are afraid. Night falls again, and you return to the quarters with the others, your body a catalogue of complaints. The meal is sparse, the fire is smoky, the conversation is tired. But there's something happening tonight. A meeting, secret and dangerous, held in the woods beyond the cabins where the patrollers can't easily reach. Word spreads through glances and gestures, a language invisible to anyone outside the community. After midnight, when the main house goes dark and the overseers retreat to their beds, you slip out of your cabin and make your way through the trees. Others are already gathered, perhaps 24 people from this plantation and neighboring ones, connected by networks the masters don't know exist. There's a man speaking, someone with news from outside. The talk is of freedom, of the growing movement in the North to end slavery, of people who've made it out and are sending word back. The information is precious, dangerous, and absolutely forbidden. If you're caught here, the punishment will be severe. But you had to come. You had to hear it for yourself. The world outside this plantation is real, and it's changing. And someday, maybe soon, those changes will reach even here. The meeting ends before dawn. You make your way back to your cabin and lie down on your pallet for the few hours remaining before the horn sounds again. Your heart is racing with what you've heard, a mixture of fear and something you haven't felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or something fiercer. The knowledge that history isn't finished, that the story isn't over, that what seems permanent can shift and shatter in ways no one predicts. You've lived your whole life inside a system that claims to be eternal, ordained by God and nature. But you've just been reminded that systems are made by people, and what people make, people can unmake. The horn will blow in an hour. Tomorrow will look like today. Your hands will bleed, your back will ache, and the overseer will watch for any sign of disobedience. But somewhere inside you, something has shifted. The exhaustion is still there, the fear is still there, but underneath them now burns a small and stubborn flame. You are not what they say you are. This place is not the end of the story. And someday, maybe not in your lifetime, but someday, the world will know what was done here and who survived it and how. You close your eyes. The darkness is absolute, and you wait for the sound that will begin another day, holding onto that flame like a promise, like a prayer, like the only thing they cannot take away. So tonight, as you lie in your own bed, in your own room, with your own name and your own tomorrow stretching ahead of you unridden, take a moment to sit with what you've heard. The people who endured this weren't historical abstractions. They were human beings with favorite foods and private jokes, and people they loved and dreams that kept them alive. They built families in a system designed to destroy families. They created culture under conditions meant to strip them of everything. They maintained hope when hope cost everything. They did this not because they were saints or heroes in some storybook sense, but because they were human, fully and fiercely human, and that humanity was something no law, no whip, no ledger could ever fully extinguish. What they endured matters. What they built matters. What they passed down through blood and memory and song, still shapes the world we live in today. So as you drift towards sleep, warm and safe in ways they could only imagine, maybe let a little of that flame burn in you too. Not guilt, which helps no one, but recognition, remembrance, and maybe gratitude, not for suffering, but for survival, for the stubborn, impossible, beautiful fact that they made it through, enough of them, long enough, to make the future possible. Their tomorrow became your today, and what you do with it is the only thanks that matters. You're standing in a one-room cabin somewhere in the American South. The year is 1842, and the walls around you are rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and straw. Gaps let in the cold, the mosquitoes, and the faint sounds of the plantation settling into evening. The floor beneath your bare feet is packed dirt, cool and slightly damp. You've been working since before dawn, and every muscle in your body aches with the specific exhaustion that comes from labor that isn't yours to profit from. Your hands are calloused, your back permanently curved from bending, and your skin carries the smell of sweat, earth, and whatever crop defines your existence this season. But tonight, something different stirs in your chest. You've noticed someone whose laugh cuts through the monotony of the fields, someone whose eyes meet yours across the rows of tobacco or rice or cotton. And now you're wondering if maybe, just maybe, there's a way to build something that belongs only to you. Here's the thing about falling in love when you're enslaved. Every tender feeling comes wrapped in terror. Because you don't own yourself. You don't own your time, your body, or your future. And you certainly don't own the right to decide who shares your life. The person you're drawn to might belong to the same enslaver, which is convenient in the cruelest sense. Or they might belong to a neighboring plantation, which means every moment together becomes a negotiation with people who see you as property. You can't court freely. You can't propose on your own terms. Before anything happens, before any promise is made, you need permission. Permission from the person who owns you. Permission from the person who owns them. And those permissions can be denied for any reason or no reason at all. Imagine gathering the courage to approach your enslaver. You stand with your hat in your hands, eyes carefully lowered, voice steady despite the pounding in your chest. You're asking for the right to love someone, and the person you're asking might grant it cheerfully, seeing an opportunity to breed more workers. Or they might deny it because they're in a bad mood, because they have other plans for you, because they simply enjoy the power of saying no. Your entire emotional future hangs on the whim of someone who doesn't consider you fully human. Welcome to courtship in the antebellum South. And even if you receive that precious permission, it can be revoked at any moment. Your enslaver might change their mind next week, next month, next year. The ground beneath your relationship is never stable. It shifts with the moods and finances of people who view your love as an inconvenience at best, an investment opportunity at worst. Let's say permission is granted. Congratulations. Now comes the process of actually building a relationship, which looks nothing like the courtship rituals of free society happening just miles away in the big house. You don't have leisure time. You don't have money to buy gifts. You don't have the luxury of slow Sunday strolls or letters sealed with wax. What you have is stolen moments, a conversation by the well at twilight, a walk together when you're both assigned to the same errand, a glance across the fields that says everything words cannot. These moments are precious because they're rare. You might work 16 hours in a day and have only 15 minutes with the person you love. You learn to compress entire conversations into looks, entire declarations into the brush of fingertips as you pass. the language of love becomes something silent, something the overseers can't quite catch, something that lives in the spaces between words. If the person you love belongs to another plantation, these moments become even more precious and precarious. You might only see them on Sundays, if you're lucky enough to have Sundays off, and if you can get a pass to travel. A pass, a piece of paper that grants you temporary permission to move your own body from one place to another. Without it, you're subject to patrols, those roving groups of white men whose job is to catch enslaved people traveling without authorization. Getting caught could mean a beating. Getting caught repeatedly could mean your courting privileges revoked entirely. So you walk the dark roads with your pass clutched tight, your ears straining for hoofbeats, your heart divided between fear and longing. The night air smells of pine and damp earth. Every snapped twig makes you freeze. Every distant voice sends your heart racing. And yet you keep walking, mile after mile, because at the end of that road is someone worth the risk. The courting rituals that developed in enslaved communities were their own beautiful creations, born from necessity and defiance. You might bring small gifts when you could manage them. A ribbon acquired through trade, a carved wooden comb made with your own hands during precious evening hours when you should have been sleeping. The carving took weeks. Small moments stolen after exhaustion should have claimed you, but you wanted to give something, anything that proved your devotion. You might sing to the person you loved, songs that carried double meanings, songs that spoke of freedom and devotion in the same breath. Music was one thing that couldn't be entirely controlled, and so it became a language of courtship, of hope, of everything that had to stay unspoken in daylight. The melodies drifted through the quarters in the evening, carrying messages that only those who knew the codes could understand. Community elders often played matchmaker, suggesting unions, advising young people, trying to guide relationships towards stability in a world designed to destroy them. These weren't just romantic gestures. They were acts of cultural preservation, ways of maintaining human dignity when the entire system insisted you had none. So you've courted, you've loved, you've navigated the impossible maze of permissions and patrols and stolen moments. Now you want to make it official, you want to marry. And here's where the cruelty becomes almost absurd in its totality. Your marriage will not be legal. Not in any court, not in any church that matters to the law, not in any document that carries weight. You can stand before a preacher, speak vows, exchange promises of forever, and none of it will protect you from being separated tomorrow. The phrase that haunted enslaved marriages was not "till death do us part." It was "till death or distance do us part." Some ceremonies made this explicit, the words spoken aloud as a grim acknowledgement of reality. You're not just promising love. You're promising to love despite the knowledge that any day, any hour, your spouse could be sold away, and you might never see them again. That shadow hangs over every moment of joy, every quiet evening together, every plan you dare to make. The wedding itself, though, was real, deeply, profoundly real. Communities gathered to witness these unions with as much solemnity and joy as any free wedding. The most iconic tradition was jumping the broom. You and your beloved would hold hands, and together you'd leap over a broom laid on the ground. The symbolism varied by community. Some said it represented sweeping away the old and starting fresh. Others connected it to African traditions carried across the water in memory and adapted to new soil. What mattered was that it meant something. It created a moment that belonged to you, that the enslaver could witness but never truly own. The broom itself might be decorated with ribbons if ribbons could be found, or simply left plain, a working tool transformed into a sacred object by the intention behind the leap. The height of your jump, some believed, predicted the balance of power in your marriage. Jump high, and you'd have a partnership of equals. Stumble, and perhaps one would lead more than the other. People laughed at this, but they also watched carefully. After the jump, there might be music, dancing, food, if it could be gathered. A feast made from whatever could be saved or grown, or quietly taken from the big house kitchen. Sweet potatoes maybe, cornbread. If someone had managed to catch a possum or rabbit, there might even be meat. You'd eat together, your community surrounding you, their presence a form of protection. A promise that even if the law didn't recognize your union, they did. The taste of that food, whatever it was, would stay with you. Years later, you'd remember the exact flavor of that cornbread, the way the firelight caught your beloved's face, the sound of voices raised in song as the night deepened around you. Someone might play a fiddle or a banjo, instruments crafted from gourds and animal hide, sounds that carried memories of Africa adapted to American soil. The dancing would last until exhaustion claimed everyone, until even the joy of celebration couldn't overcome the knowledge that dawn would bring another day of labor. But not everyone got even this much. Some enslavers refused to allow ceremonies at all, seeing them as dangerous, indulgences that gave enslaved people ideas about autonomy. Others insisted on presiding over the weddings themselves, turning what should have been a moment of joy into another display of control. Imagine standing there, speaking your vows, while the person who owns you watches with proprietary satisfaction, knowing that they see this moment not as your love story, but as a transaction, a breeding arrangement, an investment in future laborers. The intimacy of the moment invaded by the gaze of power. Your words feel hollow even as you mean them with everything you have. Some couples chose to marry in secret, conducting their own ceremonies in the quarters after dark, witnessed only by those they trusted. These hidden marriages were acts of rebellion, assertions of humanity that didn't require white approval to be valid. The risk of discovery was real, but so was the need for something that belonged entirely to you. Your wedding night is nothing like what free couples experience. There's no honeymoon, no privacy, no time set aside for the beginning of your new life together. Tomorrow, you'll both be back in the fields at dawn, your bodies belonging to someone else's profit. If you're lucky and you both belong to the same plantation, you might share a cabin now. More likely, you'll squeeze into space that already houses others, your wedding bed separated from the rest of the room by nothing more than a hung blanket, if you have one to spare. The cabin is small, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, and it holds your entire married life. Cooking happens at the fireplace in the corner, smoke staining the low ceiling black. Sleep happens on a pallet stuffed with corn husks or moss, the rustling following every movement you make. Intimacy happens in whispered darkness, always aware of the thin walls, the nearby bodies, the complete absence of anything resembling solitude. The smell of smoke never quite leaves the air. The sound of others breathing, coughing, shifting in. Their sleep becomes the soundtrack of your marriage. You learn to find privacy in small ways, in moments, in the particular silence that falls when everyone pretends not to hear. If your spouse belongs to another plantation, your reality is something called an abroad marriage. Congratulations, you're married to someone you might see once a week. If everything goes perfectly, your husband or wife lives miles away, and every visit requires permission, travel, and timing that never quite works in your favor. You spend your nights alone in your cabin, missing someone you're legally bound to in the eyes of your community, but completely separated from in practice. The empty space beside you on the pallet feels like an accusation. You lie awake listening to the sounds of the quarters, wondering if your spouse is doing the same, wondering if they're safe, wondering when you'll see them again. Sundays become everything. You wake before dawn to walk the distance, arriving with just enough time to share a meal, talk about the week, hold each other for precious hours before you have to leave again. The walk back is always harder than the walk there, each step taking you further from the person you love, the darkness deeper, the silence heavier. Some couples in abroad marriages only saw each other monthly. Some, during busy seasons, went even longer. The loneliness was its own form of torture, loving someone you couldn't reach, building a family you couldn't live with, and children. Let's talk about children, because this is where the horror becomes almost unbearable to contemplate. You want a family. You want the normal human experience of raising children with the person you love. But every child you bring into the world is born into slavery. Your baby, from their first breath, belongs to whoever owns you. They're recorded in ledgers alongside livestock, their names written in the same ink that tracks horses and cattle. Their value is assessed based on health, future labor, potential, and how much they might fetch at auction. You hold your newborn in your arms, smell that particular sweetness of baby skin, feel their fingers curl around yours, and you know with absolute certainty that you have no power to protect them. They can be sold at any age. Mothers were separated from nursing infants, their milk still flowing as they were loaded onto carts headed elsewhere. Toddlers were taken from families and sent to different plantations. Children old enough to work were especially vulnerable to sale, their growing bodies representing value that enslavers were eager to capitalize on. The specific cruelty of this system is hard to overstate. You love your children with the same fierce, all-consuming love that any parent feels. But that love comes with constant grinding fear. Every time an enslaver has financial troubles, you wonder if your child will be the one sold to cover debts. Every time a stranger visits the plantation, you watch their eyes and pray, they're not here to buy. You try to prepare your children for a world that will treat them as property, teaching them survival skills, obedience strategies, the careful art of navigating white authority without losing themselves entirely. You want to give them hope, but you also have to give them realism. Some parents made the agonizing choice not to name their children immediately, waiting to see if the infant would survive the brutal conditions of early life. Others poured extra meaning into names, choosing words that carried prayers and aspirations in the languages the enslavers couldn't understand. A name was sometimes the only inheritance you could guarantee. You whispered it over your child in the darkness, a secret gift that couldn't be taken away. Mothers faced particular horrors. Pregnancy offered no relief from labor. You worked in the fields until your body could no longer manage it, your belly swelling beneath the sun, your back screaming with a pain that had no remedy. Then, you returned to work as soon as possible after giving birth, sometimes within days. Some women delivered babies in the fields themselves, surrounded by other workers who helped however they could, before overseers demanded everyone return to their tasks. The dirt beneath you, the sky above, and a circle of women who understood because they'd been there too. Nursing was complicated by work schedules. Some plantations had nurseries where infants were left during the day, tended by elderly women too old for field work. You might have only brief periods to nurse your child, rushing from the fields when permitted, your body aching both from labor and from the fullness of milk. The bond between mother and child formed under these conditions was no less powerful for being constrained. If anything, the precariousness intensified the devotion. Every moment with your child felt borrowed, stolen, precious, beyond measure. Let's say the worst happens. Let's say you wake up one morning and discover that your spouse or your child has been sold. Maybe there was warning. Rumors that traveled through the quarters, whispered from cabin to cabin in the darkness. Maybe you had a few days to say goodbye, to hold each other one last time, to make promises you both knew couldn't be kept. You tried to memorize everything, the exact shade of their eyes, the sound of their laugh, the way they moved, walked, breathed. You pressed these details into your memory like flowers into a book, trying to preserve something that was about to be destroyed. Or maybe there was no warning at all. Your husband went to the fields as usual and simply didn't return. Your daughter was taken while you were working, her small body loaded onto a cart that disappeared down the road before anyone could tell you. You came back to the cabin and found only absence. The grief of this separation was considered one of the deepest sufferings of slavery. Formerly enslaved people who later recorded their stories described it in terms usually reserved for death, because it was a kind of death. Your family member still existed somewhere in the world, still breathed and walked and maybe thought of you, but they were as lost to you as if they'd been buried in the ground. More painful, perhaps, because death has finality. Separation has hope, that thin, cruel thread of hope that maybe someday, somehow, you'll find each other again. The auction block was where many of these separations happened. If you've ever seen depictions of slave auctions, you might think you understand. You don't. Imagine standing on a platform while strangers examine your body, your teeth, your muscle tone. Hands that you don't want touching you, turning your face, squeezing your arms, making you walk back and forth like an animal at market. Now imagine watching your child stand on that same platform while someone evaluates their worth in dollars. Your child, who you taught to walk, whose tears you wiped, whose laughter was the only good thing in your days. Families pleaded to be sold together. Sometimes these pleas were ignored entirely. Sometimes they were used as leverage to drive prices up. A mother willing to do anything to stay with her children might fetch more money if sold to someone who promised not to separate them, promises that were rarely kept. The sounds of these auctions, the crying, the shouting of prices, the final crack of the auctioneer's voice declaring sold, haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. Those sounds echoed in dreams, surfacing unexpectedly at moments of quiet, a trauma that never quite healed. Some families did find each other. After emancipation, newly freed people placed advertisements in newspapers, desperately searching for loved ones sold away years or decades before. These ads are heartbreaking documents. They describe distinguishing features, last known locations, the names of former enslavers. They represent the continuation of love across impossible distances and years. Information about Sam, my husband, sold from me in Richmond in 1853. He had a scar over his left eye and walked with a slight limp. Any information would be gratefully received. These advertisements ran for years, some for decades, their authors refusing to give up hope. Some searches succeeded. Husbands and wives reunited after 20, 30 years apart. Parents found children who'd grown into adults they didn't recognize. The stories of these reunions are almost unbearably moving. People who had carried each other in memory for decades, finally able to touch, to speak, to confirm that the other person had survived. But many searches ended in silence. The loved one had died, moved too far to be traced, or simply vanished into the vast cruelty of the system. Some people searched until their own deaths, never finding, never knowing. But here's what the history of enslaved marriage also teaches us. And this is the part that might help you sleep tonight rather than lie awake in horror. People loved anyway. They married anyway. They had children anyway, despite knowing what those children would face. They built communities, created traditions, maintained hope against all evidence that hope was reasonable. The wedding ceremonies continued. The courting rituals evolved and adapted. The jumping of brooms happened in thousands of secret and public moments across the South, each one a declaration that love was stronger than law, that humanity couldn't be owned even when bodies could. Enslaved people didn't have the luxury of giving up on love because the circumstances were bad. They chose connection precisely because everything around them demanded isolation. They built families because family was resistance. Every marriage was an act of faith in a future that the system said shouldn't exist for them. The marriages themselves often showed remarkable resilience. Couples who'd been together for decades developed partnerships that distributed labor, shared resources, and provided mutual support in ways that made survival slightly more possible. Husbands might tend small gardens in evening hours, growing food to supplement the inadequate rations provided by enslavers. The smell of those gardens, rich earth and growing things, became the smell of hope itself. Collard greens, sweet potatoes, black-eyed peas, crops that could sustain bodies the system wanted to break. Wives might sew, mend, and create from scraps the small comforts that made cabin life bearable. A quilt pieced together from worn-out clothes became more than warmth. It became a record of family, each patch holding memories. Together, they created households that functioned despite every structural force working against them. They raised children who knew they were loved, even when they couldn't be protected. They built communities that remembered birthdays and anniversaries, that mourned separations and celebrated reunions, that maintained the social fabric the system tried to tear apart. Religion played a complex role in these marriages. Many enslaved people adopted Christianity, sometimes forced, sometimes chosen, and often transformed into something the white churches wouldn't recognize. In the hidden spaces of the slave quarters, preachers who were themselves enslaved conducted services that blended African traditions with Christian theology. These gatherings were illegal, dangerous, and essential. Hush harbors, they were sometimes called, secret worship spaces in the woods or swamps where voices could be raised without white ears hearing. The God they worshipped understood suffering. The heaven they imagined promised reunion with separated loved ones. The marriage ceremonies conducted by these preachers carried spiritual weight that transcended legal invisibility. When an enslaved preacher pronounced a couple married, the community believed it, and that belief created reality. Not legal reality, but something perhaps more durable. A spiritual bond that couldn't be dissolved by sale or distance. The words spoken over those unions echoed in hearts long after the ceremonies ended, long after separations tore families apart, long after everything else was taken away. The physical intimacy of enslaved marriage happened in conditions that made privacy nearly impossible. Your cabin was small, crowded, and offered no separation between daily life and intimate moments. Children might sleep on pallets, feet away from where parents lay together. Other families might share the same structure, their blanket walls the only boundary between households. The sounds of the night, creaking wood, wind through gaps, the movements of others, became a kind of privacy themselves, covering what needed to be covered. And yet intimacy happened. People found ways to create moments of connection, to maintain the physical relationship, that was part of their bond. They developed signals, understood silences, learned each other's rhythms in ways that transcended the cramped conditions. The resourcefulness required to sustain a marriage under these conditions speaks to both the strength of enslaved people and the cruelty of a system that denied them even basic human privacy. Some enslavers actively interfered in the intimate lives of enslaved couples. The practice of forced breeding was real and horrifying. Enslaved women were sometimes paired with men not of their choosing, their bodies treated as reproductive resources. Enslaved men were sometimes used as studs, forced to father children with multiple women regardless of their own marriages. These practices existed alongside and in tension with the marriages enslaved people chose for themselves. A woman might be married to a man she loved while simultaneously being violated by the enslaver or forced to bear children with others. The psychological torture of this dual existence, trying to maintain a genuine marriage while having no control over your own body, represents one of slavery's deepest cruelties. And yet marriages survived even this. Couples found ways to maintain their bond despite violations that would seem to make such bonds impossible. The love persisted, carrying wounds, but persisting nonetheless. Let's move through a typical day in an enslaved marriage, because the rhythm of daily life is where love actually lived. You wake before dawn to the sound of the horn or bell that signals the start of work. The cabin is cold, the fire burned down to embers, and the darkness outside is absolute. Your spouse is beside you, warm in the brief moment before the cold reality of the day begins. Maybe you have time to speak a few words. Maybe you simply look at each other, that look containing everything you can't say aloud. A touch of hands, quick and secret, before you're both up, moving, preparing for labor that will consume the next 12 to 16 hours. If you're lucky, you work near each other. You might catch glimpses throughout the day, exchange a word. During water breaks, know that the other person is present, even if you can't be together. If you're unlucky, your work takes you to different parts of the plantation, and the day becomes an exercise in waiting, enduring, counting hours until evening. Evening brings its own challenges. You return to the cabin exhausted, hungry, with barely enough energy to prepare food from the meager rations you've been given. The rations themselves were calculated to provide just enough sustenance to keep you working, nothing more. Maybe you have a small garden plot, tended in whatever fragments of time you can steal from sleep. The vegetables from that garden make the difference between adequate nutrition and constant hunger. You cook together, or one cooks, while the other handles the endless small tasks of survival. Children need attention. The cabin needs maintenance. There's always something worn that needs mending. And yet, within this exhaustion, there are moments. A touch as you pass each other in the small space. A joke that makes you both laugh despite everything. The comfort of sleeping beside someone who knows you, who shares your burden, who loves you in a world that insists you're unlovable. These moments were what people lived for. Not grand gestures, but small intimacies that proved humanity persisted. Sundays, for those who had them off, became sacred time for marriages. It was the one day when labor might pause, when couples could actually spend hours together rather than minutes. If you were in an abroad marriage, Sunday was when you traveled to be with your spouse, setting out in the darkness to maximize your time together. If you lived together, Sunday was when you could actually talk, plan, dream. Some couples spent Sundays attending religious services together, their shared faith another bond strengthening the marriage. Others spent the day on their own small projects, building up the household, caring for children. trying to accumulate the tiny fragments of stability the system otherwise denied. The quality of light on a Sunday afternoon felt different. The air tasted of something almost like freedom. You could sit with your spouse, really sit, without the overseer's eye, without the relentless demand of labor, and remember what it meant to be fully human together. The community surrounding an enslaved marriage was itself a crucial support system. Older women advised younger wives, sharing knowledge about childbirth, about managing households on nothing, about surviving the unsurvivable. Experienced fathers counseled new husbands, teaching them how to protect families they had no legal right to protect. When couples fought, which they did because they were human and stress was constant and resources were scarce, community members often mediated. When children misbehaved, the whole community might participate in discipline and instruction. The phrase "it takes a village" wasn't an abstraction. It was survival strategy. Your marriage existed within a web of relationships that sustained it, celebrated it, and mourned when it was torn apart. These communities developed their own standards for marriage, their own expectations for husbands and wives, their own ways of handling divorce and separation that operated entirely outside white legal systems. Some marriages did end by choice rather than force. The stresses of enslaved life broke some couples. Infidelity happened, sometimes chosen and sometimes coerced. Some people simply grew apart, their initial connection unable to survive years of grinding hardship. Community responses to these situations varied, but generally there were established ways to handle marital dissolution that allowed both parties to move on, potentially remarrying within the community. These weren't formal divorces in any legal sense, but they were recognized separations that allowed people to rebuild their lives. The community witnessed these endings just as they witnessed beginnings, providing structure and meaning in a world that offered neither. As you lie in your own bed tonight, comfortable and free in ways those enslaved couples never were, think about what they built. They created functional marriages without any legal protection. They raised children to be resilient, despite knowing those children might be stolen. They maintained hope despite constant evidence that hope was foolish. They loved deeply, truly, with the full force of human emotion, in circumstances designed to make love impossible. Every wedding ceremony was an act of defiance. Every child born to married parents was a statement of faith in the future. Every couple that stayed together through separations, losses, and daily degradations proved that human connection can survive nearly anything. After emancipation, one of the first things freed people did was formalize their marriages. They lined up at churches and courthouses to have ceremonies that now carried legal weight. They took surnames, often choosing new ones that symbolized their freedom: Freeman, Liberty, Justice. Names that meant something after generations of being named by others. They searched desperately for family members sold away. They built households finally protected by law, finally free from the threat of separation by sale. But they also carried with them the traditions developed in slavery. The jumping of the broom continued, not out of necessity, but out of honor for what their ancestors had created. The community-centered approach to marriage persisted. The deep understanding that love is an act of resistance never quite faded. The stories that survive tell us about individuals whose names we know. They tell us about couples reunited after decades apart, about children who found parents they'd last seen as toddlers, about marriages that endured 40 years of separation and then continued for decades more. These stories are extraordinary, but they represent something ordinary too. They represent the basic human need for connection, for family, for love. That need couldn't be legislated away. It couldn't be beaten out. It couldn't be destroyed by systems designed specifically to destroy it. The enslaved people who married each other, who built families, who loved despite everything, were doing what humans have always done. They were just doing it under conditions that made every act of love simultaneously an act of impossible courage. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your own bed, in your own home, free to love whoever you choose and protected by laws that recognize your humanity, spare a thought for those who loved without any of those protections. Their marriages were real. Their families were real. Their love was as profound and complicated and beautiful as any love has ever been. They built something lasting out of stolen moments and jumped brooms and whispered vows in crowded cabins. They created traditions that survive to this day. They proved that even the most brutal systems cannot fully control the human heart. And maybe that's the most important thing to carry with you into dreams tonight. The knowledge that love has always found a way. Even in the darkest chapters of human history, people held onto each other, built families, maintained hope. They did it without guarantees, without protections, without any assurance that tomorrow wouldn't bring catastrophic loss. They did it because love is what makes us human. And humanity, as it turns out, is remarkably hard to destroy. Congratulations, you've just woken up in a Harlem tenement sometime around 1925. The good news is you're alive, and you're in the most vibrant black community in America. The bad news is you're sharing a 2-room apartment with 7 other people, and someone's elbow is currently pressed against your face. Your bed isn't really a bed. It's a mattress on the floor, or maybe just a pallet of blankets wedged into whatever corner wasn't already claimed. The concept of personal space doesn't exist here, not because people don't want it, but because landlords have figured out they can charge 3 times the rent to black families desperate for housing in a city that doesn't want them anywhere else. You blink awake to the sound of the elevated train rattling past your window, shaking the walls like a small earthquake every 15 minutes. The glass panes vibrate in their frames. Dust falls from the ceiling in tiny clouds. You've learned to sleep through it, mostly, the way soldiers learn to sleep through artillery. The room smells of bodies and yesterday's cooking, and the particular mustiness of plaster that's been wet too many times. There's no ventilation to speak of, just one window that faces a brick wall 3 feet away, letting in approximately no fresh air and all of your neighbor's cigarette smoke. The building itself is a monument to neglect. Built decades ago for white families who've long since fled to better neighborhoods, it was never meant to house this many people. The stairs sag in the middle where thousands of feet have worn them down. The hallways are dark because the landlord won't replace burned-out bulbs, and the walls are covered in a greasy film that never seems to wash off no matter how hard the women scrub. Paint peels in long, curling strips, revealing layers of older colors beneath, a geological record of the building's slow decay. The banister wobbles dangerously, and everyone knows to grip it lightly, if at all. Children have fallen. Old folks have tumbled. Nobody sues because who has money for lawyers, and what would be the point anyway? You try to sit up without disturbing the person next to you, probably a cousin who arrived last month from Georgia, still looking for work, still sleeping on your floor, because where else would they go? The Great Migration is in full swing, and every week another relative or friend of a friend shows up at your door with a cardboard suitcase and eyes full of hope that New York will be different from the South they fled. And it is different. There are no lynch mobs here, No sharecropper contracts that keep you perpetually in debt. No white men who can murder you for looking at them wrong without facing any consequence at all. But different doesn't mean easy. Different just means the violence wears a different face. You swing your feet onto the floor and immediately regret it because the linoleum is peeling and cold even in summer, and in winter it feels like standing on a frozen pond. The toilet is down the hall, shared with 4 other families. There's always a line in the morning, and the smell drifting from that direction suggests someone had a rough night. You grab your robe, if you have one, and join the queue, nodding to Mrs. Patterson from 4B, who's been waiting so long she's nearly fallen back asleep standing up. Mr. Williams from 4D is ahead of her, shifting from foot to foot with increasing urgency, muttering under his breath about the injustice of shared facilities. His wife died last winter from pneumonia, and he's been slowly unraveling ever since, talking to himself more than to others, forgetting to eat unless someone reminds him. The community watches out for him because that's what you do here. But watching out only goes so far when everyone's barely surviving themselves. The bathroom itself is a marvel of urban decay. The toilet runs constantly, a thin stream of water that adds to the building's already precarious plumbing. The sink has one working faucet that produces a trickle of rust-colored water, and you've learned to let it run for a full minute before splashing any on your face. The tub, well, nobody uses the tub anymore, not since something started growing in it that no amount of scrubbing could remove. A dark greenish stain that seems to spread a little more each month. The mirror above the sink is cracked diagonally, giving you 2 slightly offset reflections every time you look at yourself. You do your business quickly, wash your hands and face with water so cold it makes your teeth ache, and head back to start another day. Breakfast is whatever's available. Maybe some cornbread left over from last night, slightly stale but still edible if you warm it over the stove. Maybe a cup of coffee stretched so thin it's basically brown water with ambition. Sugar is expensive, milk spoils fast without reliable refrigeration, and fresh fruit is a luxury you can't afford most weeks. You eat, standing up because there aren't enough chairs, and you eat fast because you've got to get to work, assuming you have work today, which is never guaranteed. The icebox in the corner holds whatever's left from the weekend, which isn't much. A small block of ice melts slowly in the upper compartment, dripping into a pan that someone forgot to empty again. The whole contraption sweats in summer and barely keeps things cold enough to matter. You've gotten creative with beans, with rice, with the cheapest cuts of meat the butcher is willing to sell. Pig's feet, ham hocks, chitlins, neck bones, all the parts white folks threw away until black cooks transformed them into something worth eating. Your grandmother would recognize the recipes, handed down from slavery times when making something from nothing wasn't a choice but a survival skill. Necessity is the mother of cuisine, and Harlem kitchens are nothing if not necessary. The women in this building could write cookbooks that would put fancy restaurants to shame, coaxing flavor from ingredients that cost pennies, stretching a single chicken into 3 meals through sheer determination and ancestral knowledge. So you've survived the morning routine in your crumbling tenement. Now let's talk about getting to work, assuming you're lucky enough to have a job. And luck is exactly what it takes, because Harlem in the 1920s is teeming with people who migrated north, chasing factory jobs that mostly don't exist for them anymore. The war is over. White soldiers came home, wanting their positions back, and suddenly those employment opportunities that beckon black Southerners northward have mysteriously evaporated. Signs that once read "Colored Help Wanted" have been replaced with No coloured need apply, or nothing at all. Just closed doors and averted eyes. You're competing with thousands of other hopeful souls for whatever scraps the economy tosses your way. If you're a man, you might work as a porter, a janitor, an elevator operator. You might load trucks at the docks, or haul garbage, or do any of the 100 jobs white New Yorkers consider beneath them. The work is backbreaking, and the pay is insulting, but it's work, and work means survival. If you're a woman, you're probably doing domestic work, cleaning houses in white neighborhoods, scrubbing floors and washing dishes for families who won't let you use their bathroom because they're afraid you'll somehow contaminate it. You ride the subway downtown before dawn, arriving at back doors in neighborhoods where you'd be questioned by police if you walk down the sidewalk after dark. The mistress of the house inspects your work with suspicious eyes, runs her finger along mantles looking for dust, checks the corners for signs of laziness. She calls you by your first name while expecting you to call her mom. She pays you $3 a week if you're lucky, $5 if you're exceptional, and docks your wages for any infraction real or imagined. You smile and nod and say, "Yes, ma'am," because the alternative is no work at all. And no work means eviction, means hunger, means your children going without. You take the subway downtown, packed into cars with workers of every shade, though somehow the black passengers always seem to end up standing. The train smells of sweat and newsprint, and the particular exhaustion of people who work too hard for too little. Bodies press against you from all sides, strangers forced into intimacy by the crush of morning commute. You emerge into Manhattan and walk to your job, past storefronts that don't want your business, past restaurants where you couldn't eat even if you had the money, past a city that tolerates your labor but not your presence. White pedestrians don't make way for you on the sidewalk. You're the one who steps aside, who shrinks yourself smaller, who navigates around people who act as if you're invisible until you accidentally brush against them, at which point you become very visible. Indeed, the work itself is grueling. Let's say you're one of the fortunate ones with a steady position, maybe working in a hotel or a private club. You're on your feet for 10, 12, 14 hours. You smile when you don't feel like smiling. You say, "Yes, sir," and right away, "Mom," until the words lose all meaning, until they become reflexive sounds rather than actual responses. You're invisible when it's convenient and hypervisible when something goes wrong. A guest watch goes missing, and suddenly everyone's looking at you, the help, as if theft were coded into your DNA. The manager pulls you aside, asks questions that aren't really questions, searches your pockets with rough hands while other employees watch. They find nothing because you took nothing, but the suspicion clings to you anyway, an invisible stain that never quite washes out. You keep your head down and do your job and try not to think about the fact that you're better educated than half the people you're serving, that you can quote Shakespeare and solve equations they'd never attempt. But none of that matters because your skin determines your station, and your station is the service entrance. The pay is barely enough to cover rent, which is already 2 weeks overdue because your landlord raised it again. And what choice do you have? You can't move to a white neighborhood. They won't rent to you. Real estate agents practice something called blockbusting, scaring white families with threats of black neighbors, then buying their properties cheap and selling them dear to black families desperate for housing. You can't find cheaper housing in Harlem because every landlord knows they've got a captive market and prices accordingly. Some folks are paying twice what white families pay for half the space in buildings twice as decrepit. It's extortion with a smile, and everyone knows it. But knowing doesn't change anything. The rent is due regardless of fairness, and the eviction notice doesn't. care about justice. After work, you take the train back uptown, joining the tide of exhausted bodies flowing back to Harlem. The sun is setting behind the buildings, painting the sky orange and pink, and for a moment, the neighborhood looks almost beautiful. You pass the churches and the beauty parlors, the numbers runners on the corners trying to catch your eye with knowing glances, the street vendors selling hot dogs and pretzels and dreams of a better tomorrow. The smell of frying food mingles with exhaust fumes and garbage and the particular urban perfume of too many people packed too close together. You pass the storefront where Marcus Garvey's followers gather, talking about black nationalism and returning to Africa, about dignity and self-determination in a world that offers neither. Their uniforms are impressive, military style with gold braid, and their certainty is almost contagious, the belief that somewhere, somehow, there's a place where black folks can simply be. You pass the corner where old Mr. Johnson plays his guitar and sings blues so sad they make your chest hurt. Songs about Mississippi and lost love and the endless weight of being black in America. His voice is rough and beautiful, weathered by decades of life that hasn't been kind, but hasn't broken him either. The music follows you up the block, mixing with the clatter of the L train and the shouts of children playing stickball in the street. This is Harlem in the golden hour, the brief window between work and worry when the neighborhood feels alive with possibility. But let's talk about that legendary nightlife you've heard so much about. The Cotton Club, the Savoy Ballroom, all those famous spots where jazz was supposedly born and everybody danced until dawn. Here's the catch. Most of those clubs don't want you inside. The Cotton Club, that glamorous establishment you've seen in photographs, features black performers for white audiences. The doormen turn away black patrons, while white folks from downtown come uptown to experience what they call exotic entertainment. They sit at tables covered in white linen, sipping illegal champagne, watching black dancers perform routines designed to titillate and shock, jungle themes and primitive fantasies that have nothing to do with anyone's actual life. You might hear Duke Ellington or Cab Calloway from the street outside, the music drifting through closed doors into a neighborhood full of people who created this art form, but aren't allowed to enjoy it in its most famous venue. The irony is thick enough to choke on. You've been relegated to spectator status in your own cultural revolution. If you want to actually participate in Harlem nightlife, you're going to smaller clubs, basement joints, rent parties in people's apartments. The rent party is the real Harlem invention, a brilliant solution to an impossible problem. Your rent is due, you can't pay it, so you throw a party and charge admission. 25 cents at the door, maybe 50 cents for a plate of food, and you dance and drink and laugh until the sun comes up, hoping enough people show to cover what you owe before the landlord comes knocking Monday morning. Someone pushes the furniture against the walls. Someone else brings a piano player or a guitar man. Someone's cousin supplies the liquor, and suddenly your cramped apartment transforms into something magical. The floorboards bounce under dancing feet. The walls sweat with humidity from all those bodies pressed together. Strangers become friends, at least for the night, united by rhythm and the shared understanding that everyone here is just trying to survive. And those parties are genuine. The music is raw and beautiful, piano players pounding out boogie-woogie rhythms, while the floor shakes and the neighbors complain, and nobody cares, because everyone's trying to forget, for a few hours, how hard tomorrow's going to be. The dancers move with a freedom you don't see in daylight hours. Bodies, uncoiling from the tension of constant vigilance, expressing things that can't be spoken aloud. but don't romanticize it. These parties exist because people are desperate. The joy is real, but it's joy carved out of necessity, pleasure stolen from the jaws of poverty. You dance because if you don't dance, you'll cry, and crying doesn't pay the rent either. The liquor at these parties is probably bathtub gin, prohibition being in full swing, and what you're drinking might make you sick, or blind, or worse, depending on what the bootlegger cut it with. You've heard stories about people going blind from bad hooch, about wood alcohol poisonings, about batches laced with chemicals that'll land you in Harlem Hospital if you're lucky, and the morgue if you're not. The stuff burns going down, leaves a chemical aftertaste that no amount of sugar or juice can quite mask. But you drink anyway, because what else are you going to do? Stay sober and think about your problems. You drink and dance and pretend the world outside doesn't exist, at least until morning comes crashing in with all its demands. Now let's talk about something nobody wants to discuss when they romanticize the Harlem Renaissance. The violence. Not the dramatic, headline-grabbing violence of race riots, though that exists too, but the everyday violence of being black in a white city. The police don't protect you. They harass you. Walking home at night, you might get stopped for no reason, patted down against a wall, questioned about where you're going and why. The officer's hands are rough, his voice rougher, and his badge gives him permission to do whatever he wants. The wrong answer, or even the right answer delivered with insufficient deference, can land you in a jail cell or a hospital bed. Officers beat black men with impunity, knowing there's no accountability, no investigation, no justice. They call it tuning up, when they work someone over with nightsticks, a casual phrase for casual brutality. You learn to cross the street when you see a badge coming. You learn to keep your hands visible and your voice soft and your eyes down. You learn survival strategies that white New Yorkers never have to consider. Lessons passed from father to son, mother to daughter, an inheritance of caution that no one asked for but everyone receives. And it's not just the police. It's the knowledge that you exist outside the protection of the law, that if something happens to you, if you're robbed or assaulted or worse, there's no guarantee anyone will care. You're on your own in ways that are difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't lived it. White gangs from neighboring areas sometimes venture into Harlem, looking for trouble, knowing the consequences will be minimal. Black men who wander into the wrong neighborhood downtown face beatings or worse. The city is carved into territories, invisible lines you learn to respect if you want to keep breathing. And within Harlem itself, the desperation breeds its own violence. Men fighting over scraps, gambling debts settled with fists or worse, domestic disputes that spill into hallways and stairwells. The race riot of 1900 isn't ancient history to you. People remember. Elders speak of it in hushed tones, the terror of white mobs rampaging through black neighborhoods, the police standing aside or joining in. And smaller incidents happen constantly, flare-ups of racial tension that don't make the papers, but leave bruises and broken bones, and that particular trauma of knowing you're hated for existing. Some nights you hear about someone who got jumped coming home from work, some kid who looked at the wrong person the wrong way and paid for it with blood and broken teeth. The community closes ranks, watches out for each other, shares warnings about which blocks to avoid after dark. This isn't paranoia. This is survival. You navigate the city like someone walking through a minefield, always aware of where you are, who's around, what might happen. That constant vigilance takes a toll. It exhausts you in ways sleep can't fix, wears you down until the weariness lives in your bones like a second skeleton. And yet you keep going, because what choice do you have? This is home now, for better or worse, and you're determined to make something of it. Let's get back to your body for a moment, because your body is staging a quiet rebellion against your living conditions. The tenement you call home is a petri dish for disease. Tuberculosis is rampant, passing from person to person in those overcrowded rooms where everyone breathes the same stale air. They call it consumption, and the name is apt because it consumes everything. The lungs first, then the strength, then the hope. You know someone who died from it, probably multiple someones. Watch them cough their lives away in beds they shared with family members who would likely catch it next. The coughing starts small, almost nothing, just a tickle that won't quite clear. Then it deepens, becomes wet, produces blood-flecked sputum that everyone pretends not to notice. The sick person grows thin, grows pale beneath their dark skin, grows too weak to work, and then too weak to eat, and finally too weak to breathe. The doctors don't come to Harlem often, and when they do, they treat patients with a casual dismissiveness that borders on contempt. Harlem Hospital is overcrowded and underfunded. The staff stretch so thin that waiting times can be measured in days. If something serious happens to you, if you break a bone or develop an infection or have any of the 100 medical emergencies that strike randomly, your odds aren't good. Medicine in the 1920s is crude by modern standards anyway, but medicine for black folks is cruder still. You're an afterthought in a system that wasn't built with you in mind. And it's not just tuberculosis haunting these streets. Pneumonia sweeps through the tenements every winter, picking off the elderly and the young with terrifying efficiency. Influenza still lingers in collective memory, the great pandemic of 1918 having devastated Harlem with particular cruelty just a few years back. You remember it, or you've heard the stories from those who survived, the bodies piling up faster than they could be buried, entire families wiped out in a matter of days, the morgues overflowing, the churches holding funeral after funeral after funeral. The fear of another outbreak never quite leaves. Every cough, every fever, every child who seems a little too tired carries the weight of that memory. You treat illness with home remedies passed down from grandmothers with mustard plasters and onion poultices, and prayers whispered over steaming bowls of soup. You brew teas from roots and barks. Apply compresses soaked in herbs. Call on the wisdom of elders who learned healing in the South from those who learned it during slavery from those who remembered Africa. Sometimes it works, often it doesn't. But what else can you do when the hospital might turn you away and the doctor charges more than you make in a week? The summer is coming, and with it, a particular kind of misery. Your apartment becomes an oven. Heat building up in the brick and plaster until the rooms are barely habitable. There's no air conditioning, obviously, and your one window provides approximately zero relief. The air sits heavy and motionless, thick with humidity that makes every breath feel like work. You sleep on the fire escape if you can, joining the parade of bodies draped across every available outdoor surface, trying to catch whatever breeze the night offers. The metal grating presses patterns into your skin, but at least it's cooler than inside. Children splash in water from open hydrants while their parents watch from stoops. Everyone just trying to survive until September brings some relief. The smell of the neighborhood in August is something you never forget. Garbage ripening in the heat, sweat from 1,000 bodies, food going bad because iceboxes can't keep up with the temperature. Flies are everywhere, fat and lazy, landing on your food, your skin, your sleeping face. The constant buzzing becomes background noise, just part of summer's soundtrack, along with the shouts and the music. and the L train's endless rattle. And yet people find joy. Stoops become social clubs where neighbors gather to gossip and commiserate and share whatever meager refreshment they can afford. Block parties spring up spontaneously, someone hauling a piano onto the sidewalk, everyone dancing in the street until the cops come to shut it down. Music pours from every window because suffering doesn't mean you stop living. It just means living takes more effort. Winter brings different problems. Your tenement's heating system, if it functions at all, produces heat so erratically that you never know whether you'll wake up sweating or shivering. The radiators clang and hiss like angry animals, sometimes working, sometimes sitting, cold and useless while you pile on every blanket you own. The wind finds every crack in the walls, every gap around the windows, sneaking in like an uninvited guest determined to steal whatever warmth you've managed to accumulate. You can see your breath indoors some mornings, little clouds that remind you the building doesn't care if you freeze. Coal is expensive, and when the building's supply runs low, the super just shrugs and tells you to complain to the landlord, who lives somewhere downtown and never returns calls. You stuff newspaper into the cracks, wear your coat indoors, sleep in your clothes. The children get sick first, then the old folks, then everyone else. A winter in a Harlem tenement is a war of attrition against the cold, and the cold usually wins a few battles before spring finally offers a truce. But here's where the story gets complicated, because despite everything, despite the poverty and the prejudice and the daily indignities that pile up like snow on a fire, Escape, Harlem in the 1920s, is producing something extraordinary. The writers and poets and musicians who'll define a cultural movement are living in these same tenements, attending these same rent parties, navigating these same impossible conditions. Langston Hughes is wandering these streets, gathering material that'll become some of the most important poetry in American history. He's working odd jobs, just like you, washing dishes, bussing tables, doing whatever it takes to survive while he writes about the beauty and pain of black life in America. Zora Neale Hurston is listening to the stories and the slang, absorbing the rhythms that'll infuse her novels. She's sitting on those same stoops, attending those same church services, filing away every detail of a community that the wider world refuses to see as fully human. The Harlem Renaissance isn't happening in fancy galleries or well-funded institutions. It's happening in cramped apartments and church basements and anywhere else. Black artists can find space to work. This is genius flourishing against all odds. Creativity as resistance, art as survival. You might brush shoulders with these people on the street, might hear them reading at a literary gathering in someone's living room, might not realize until decades later that you witnessed something historic. The barbershops and beauty parlors are where ideas spread as fast as gossip. You sit in the chair waiting for your haircut, and the conversation swirls around you like cigarette smoke. Politics and philosophy, sports and scandal, who's hiring and who's cheating on whom. All of it mixing together in spaces that serve as community centers, debate halls, and therapy offices rolled into one. The barber knows everyone's business because everyone tells him everything while he's got them captive in his chair. He's heard about your troubles at work, your landlord's latest outrage, your cousin's new baby. He dispenses advice along with the haircuts, wisdom accumulated from years of listening to every voice in the neighborhood. His scissors snip in rhythm with his words, punctuation marks in an endless sermon about life and how to live it. For women, the beauty parlor offers similar refuge, a place to get your hair pressed and your spirit lifted, to share burdens and trade recipes, and remember that you're not alone in this struggle. The smell of hot combs and pomade, the hiss of steam, the intimate act of one woman tending another's hair. These rituals bind the community together in ways that outsiders never understand. The church anchors everything. Sunday morning, the neighborhood transforms as everyone puts on their best clothes and streams toward their chosen congregation. Baptist, Methodist, AME, Pentecostal. The flavors of Black Christianity are all represented, and each service is part worship, part social event, part affirmation that you matter in a world determined to convince you otherwise. The music in these churches would make angels weep, voices blending in harmonies that carry every emotion, from despair to transcendent joy. The choir rocks and sways, the congregation responds with amens and hallelujahs, and for a few hours the weight lifts. You're not a servant or porter or an invisible presence in someone else's city. You're a child of God, dignified and beloved, and part of a community that stretches back through slavery and forward into a future that has to be better than this, because how could it possibly be worse? The preachers speak of Moses and deliverance, of justice rolling down like waters, of a promised land that waits for those who persevere, and even if you don't quite believe it's coming, the promise is enough to get you through another week. After service, the congregations spill onto the sidewalks, trading greetings and handshakes and invitations to Sunday dinner. The neighborhood transformed briefly into something that almost resembles the promised land everyone came here seeking. Let's talk about the numbers, because the numbers run everything, and everyone plays. It's an illegal lottery operated by men and women who figured out how to build empires in the margins of a society that won't let them succeed legitimately. You pick 3 numbers, bet whatever you can afford to lose, and if your combination matches some published statistic, maybe stock exchange figures or racetrack results, you win at 600 to 1 odds. The chances of winning are minuscule, but the dream of winning that keeps people betting their lunch money, their rent money, their hope. The numbers runners are everywhere, working the streets and the bars and the barbershops, collecting slips and coins from people who'd rather gamble on fortune than accept their fate. They know everyone by name. Remember your usual numbers. Extend credit when times are especially hard. Some of the biggest entrepreneurs in Harlem got their start running numbers, building businesses and political influence from what white society dismisses as mere crime. But is it crime when legitimate paths to success have been systematically blocked? Is it crime when you're just trying to build something in a system designed to keep you with nothing? The numbers also provide jobs, hundreds of them, runners and collectors and bookkeepers and enforcers, an entire underground economy operating in plain sight because the police can be paid to look elsewhere. Madame Stephanie Sinclair, the numbers queen, runs her operation with corporate precision, fighting off Italian mobsters who want a piece of her territory, bribing officials, employing lawyers, living proof that Black women can build empires even when every institution insists otherwise. She's fierce and brilliant and utterly unapologetic. A self-made millionaire in an age when Black women are supposed to be invisible. You might work for her organization if you're smart and reliable and willing to operate outside the law. The pay is better than honest work offers, and there's something satisfying about succeeding in a game rigged against you, even if success comes with risks the straight world doesn't require. She takes out ads in the local papers, warns the community about police corruption, becomes a folk hero to people who've learned that respectability offers no protection anyway. Let's talk about the children for a moment, because they're everywhere in Harlem, running through streets that serve as their playground, their classroom, their entire world. They play stickball with broomsticks and rubber balls, hopscotch on sidewalks chalked with squares, tag and hide and seek in alleyways that adults avoid after dark. They grow up fast here, learning early which streets are safe and which aren't, how to read a stranger's intentions from across the block, when to run and when to freeze. School is mandatory, but often interrupted, missed when there's work to be done, or younger siblings to watch, or no shoes fit for walking through winter slush. The classrooms are overcrowded, the teachers underpaid and sometimes undertrained, the textbooks outdated hand-me-downs from white schools downtown. But education is valued, treasured even, because everyone knows it's the only ladder out of this life. Mothers who work double shifts still check homework by candlelight. Fathers who can barely read themselves demand that their children learn to write. The dream of a better life passes down through generations, encoded in expectations that no amount of poverty can extinguish. You head home as the night settles over Harlem, the streetlights casting pools of yellow light on sidewalks still busy with people. Someone's playing piano through an open window, something slow and melancholy, and you stop for a moment to listen. A group of men on the corner are arguing about Marcus Garvey's latest speech, voices rising with passion as they debate Africa and America and where black people truly belong. His message resonates with folks who've tried everything else, who've worked hard and played by the rules and still ended up nowhere. Back to Africa sounds like freedom to people who've never felt free anywhere. A woman sells fried fish from a cart, the smell of hot oil and cornmeal filling the air, and you're tempted even though you can't really afford it. She gives you a smile that suggests she knows your situation, that she's been there too, that maybe she'll give you an extra piece if you ask nicely. Children who should be in bed are still playing in the shadows, their laughter punctuating the night, and you wonder what kind of world they'll inherit, whether it'll be any kinder than the one you're navigating now. You climb the stairs to your apartment, each step creaking under your weight, and let yourself into the crowded rooms where your family is already settling in for the night. Someone's moved your pallet again, and you have to negotiate for sleeping space. But eventually, you find a spot and lie, down with your back against the wall and your coat draped over you like a blanket. The sounds of the tenement fill your ears. Conversations through thin walls, a baby crying somewhere above you, the distant thump of music from a party down the block, a couple arguing in rapid-fire voices that rise and fall like jazz improvisation. The ceiling has water stains that you've memorized, abstract shapes that look different every time you study them. You think about tomorrow, another day of work and worry, another day of being something less than fully human in the eyes of a city that needs your labor, but not your presence. You think about the South you left behind, the terror and the poverty, and the particular cruelty of a system designed to keep you in your place forever. You think about the family you lost along the way, the ones who didn't survive the journey north, the ones still stuck in Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi, writing letters about how they might join you someday. And you think about what you're building here, despite everything, the community and the culture and the stubborn insistence on joy that no amount of hardship can extinguish. The Harlem Renaissance they'll write about in history books isn't happening in museums or universities. It's happening in this room, in rooms just like it all across the neighborhood, in the stories people tell and the songs they sing, and the way they carry themselves with dignity no matter what the world throws at them. You're part of it, even if you never publish a poem or play a note of jazz. Your survival is the foundation everything else is built on. Your presence is what makes the Renaissance possible. The thousands of ordinary black folks who migrated north carrying their dreams and their pain and their unshakable belief that somewhere, somehow, things could be better. You didn't come here to be a historical figure. You came here to live, and living in a world determined to make that difficult turns out to be its own kind of revolution. Tomorrow you'll wake up again in this overcrowded apartment, fight for the bathroom, eat whatever's available, ride the train downtown, work until your body aches, come home to this same neighborhood that's somehow both prison and sanctuary. You'll navigate the same dangers, face the same indignities, find the same small pleasures that make existence bearable. You'll listen to music that'll outlive everyone who created it. You'll eat food that carries the memory of places most people here are trying to forget. You'll speak a language that mixes southern roots with northern ambitions, that creates slang and poetry from the raw material of everyday survival. And if you're lucky, truly lucky, you'll make it through. You'll raise children who have more choices than you did. You'll see Harlem transform from a promised land that fell short to something else entirely, carrying both the triumphs and traumas into whatever comes next. So no, you probably wouldn't last a day in 1920s Harlem. Not the real one anyway. The Harlem of history books and jazz albums and romanticized memory is easier to love from a distance. The actual neighborhood, with its tuberculosis and its tenements and its rent parties born from desperation, demands more than most modern visitors could give. It demands resilience forged in the fire of slavery and tempered by the relentless pressure of being black in America. It demands creativity that flourishes despite neglect, joy that persists despite sorrow, hope that survives despite evidence. The people who lived there weren't heroes in any conventional sense. They were just people doing what people do, trying to survive and maybe build something that outlasts them. And somehow, against every odd, they did exactly that. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your own bed, with your own bathroom down the hall, with heat that works and water that runs clean, you can spare a thought for those who came before, the ones who rode trains north carrying everything they owned in cardboard suitcases, the ones who squeezed into tenements that should have been condemned, the ones who worked jobs that crushed their bodies and still came home to dance at rent parties, because what else could they do? They built a world inside a world, a black metropolis in a white city, a renaissance in the middle of a ghetto. They gave America jazz and blues and poetry that still resonates a century later. And they did it all while being told every single day that they didn't matter. They proved that wrong in ways that echo through history. Their blood, their sweat, their impossible persistence, all of it stitched into the culture we inherited. So rest well tonight, and know that the music you love, the art you admire, the very language you speak, carries traces of people who survived what you couldn't imagine and created beauty that you'll never stop benefiting from. One crowded apartment, one rent party, one stubborn heartbeat at a time.